IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, I am Sarthak and I welcome you all to yet another episode of All Things Policy. In the last few months, different kind of policies have been announced by the government. In fact, in the month of May, the finance minister announced a special economic package. This package talked about different sectors, which also included the energy sector. Apart from this, the union government has also introduced a draft bill to amend the Electricity Act of 2003. In this episode, we are going to discuss about the power sector, some of the issues plaguing the power sector for I don't know when, and how much the recent bill can do, or whether this recent bill will be effective or not. And to discuss this with me, I have with me my colleague Anupam. He's also an assistant professor at the Takshashila Institution. Hi Anupam, welcome to All Things Policy.
Hi Sarthak, glad to be here.
Anupam, so before we start, can you just tell us about some issues that the power sector has been facing for, I don't know when, since time immemorial?
Yes, but the big question is how much time do you have? I would probably need a couple of days to discuss all of the issues which are surrounding the power sector, but I'll try to be brief. I think the reforming the electricity sector in India is one of those really, really long overdue kind of reforms, in the sense that you're looking at an emerging economy. In fact, we've been saying that India is an emerging economy since we liberalized, but we are distraught with all sorts of problems with electricity. And you can imagine that electricity should be one of these prime indicators for a country that is developing and growing at the age of, at the growth rate of about 8 to 9%. And yet you have entire, villages which don't have electricity. We have completely unreliable power. Let's take, in the summer of 2018, for instance, in Bangalore, which is supposed to be the IT hub and IT, sector. I mean, the home of the IT sector in India had power cuts of up to 8 hours in a day in during the summer. And that for me is just a ridiculous kind of event that should be occurring in a country, and especially in a city which otherwise has about 20 to 30% growth. If you look at city kind of GDP growth, it's as high as 20% in Bangalore, and yet you have power cuts of up to 8%, 8 hours a day. And so this is a abysmal kind of situation that we find ourselves in, where normally you should be able to take for granted that you'll have uninterrupted power supply in at least in the cities in India, but you don't, right? And then you go into the rural sectors, you have 16-hour power cuts, 20-hour power cuts, and this is areas which supposedly have a power connection, right? Have some kind of supply of power, but it's just that kind of we're looking at that kind of a scenario. And this is for, again, households. You look at, the entire agricultural sector. Again, in the rural areas, you look at the agricultural sector. They have supposedly free electricity, but what that results in is about, 1 or 2 hours of electricity in a day, and you're supposed to get all the work done. And then you have the industrial sector where the price is extremely high, but the power supply is, again, intermittent, it is unreliable, and so on. So imagine a factory which is dependent on power to run their machines and so on, and then, there are power cuts and the workers don't have anything to do. What all of this has resulted in is a complete, a de facto privatization of power, but a de jure state-owned monopoly of power by and large in the country, right? Apart from a few places, and we'll discuss that later. So this is the broadest overview of what's gone wrong with the power sector. Now we can go into a lot of these specifics, right, of why this happens. To begin with, again, let's pick up tariff and the tariff structure that exists. As we said, we recognize in some sense, we as in the government of India recognizes in some sense that access to electricity is one of those essential things for human development. So so that recognition, I think, should be appreciated. But of course, the policy implication of that is not taken into the fullest extent. So because it's an essential service, the government by and large either gives it at extremely low tariff rates or for free in some other cases, right? So households have a tariff rate which is not at all indicative of the cost of production of power production and distribution of power. And so people end up paying far too little for the electricity they consume. And therefore, the corollary of that, as we know very well, is that when people, pay very little, they also value it very little, and if they value it very little, they tend to overuse it. So you got situations where otherwise people would have been a lot more conservative of how much they use, now can afford to let the AC and the geyser run pretty much throughout the day because they pay peanuts for it, right? So you don't really save power. So that's the household factor. And on the other hand, again, for agriculture, in a sense, they pretty much give entirely free power, by and large, for the entire country. I mean, Gujarat did a little bit of reforms at some point where they, split the agricultural feeder lines to the other normal feeder lines. But apart from that, you've got, free electricity to farmers. Now, I'm not saying that, again, it's not discussing the merits or not, but the end result is that DISCOMs just do not make enough money from this. When I say DISCOMs, I mean distribution companies, right? So distribution companies all over India is mostly owned by state governments. Few exceptions, again, we'll talk about the exceptions later, but by and large owned by state governments. And these state governments run DISCOMs don't have any money. I mean, they make, just to give you, on an average, DISCOMs make a loss of 0.41 rupee, that is 41 paisa for every unit of power supplied. And you can imagine, the DISCOMs together supply billions of kilowatts, whatever, right? So you can imagine the amount of losses that they make, right? You just take 1 year, in March 2020, the amount of overdues that they had to generators, that DISCOMs had to generators, was something to the tune of 95,000 crores, something around that. So, that's just what they owed to the generators, as in they bought power from the generators in order to distribute them, but they had no money to pay that out, right? So that is one indicative of how much financial stress the DISCOMs had, right? So when DISCOMs are in such acute financial stress, you can only imagine the kind of service they can provide. So there's a lot of things that will happen because of this, right? One, they're not able to provide continuous power, right, to households or agriculture or industries because, well, they don't have the money to actually provide it. Two, they're not able to, do all the necessary tasks which is expected of a DISCOM, which is have proper metering system. So you need to first measure how much people are consuming in order to charge them for it. But you don't have money to fix those meters. You don't have money to catch people who are, violating some of these meters. You don't have money to stop people from stealing some of these, electricity. You don't have money to fix your technical kind of losses, etc. And by the way, again, because you don't have money, just to give you a sense of this, the average technical and commercial losses that DISCOMs face in India is about 22%. That is, 22% of the power they supply is lost because of technical failures, right? And if DISCOMs had money, they could fix some of these technical losses, right? So again, it's all interlinked.
Yeah, Anupam. So again, here one thing, when it comes to their losses, right? Another aspect that is there is governments are supposed to pay DISCOM certain amount of money because the government expects that these DISCOMs provide electricity at a cheaper cost to different customers. So they want them to provide subsidies. So DISCOMs are charging less for the electricity that they are supplying, and this they should be getting from the government. But many times governments do not pay on time. There is a lot of delay, and also sometimes governments do not have the paying capacity to provide for whatever subsidies they have. The DISCOMs have provided to the consumers. This also leads to the DISCOMs continue to accumulate losses as a result of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this has happened on multiple occasions, right? Just look at the number of distortions. One, you're not charging the market price, you're charging at an extremely subsidized rate to the end consumer. Therefore, you need to be compensated in some way. So you go and ask the state government for this compensation. The state governments don't have the money or are unwilling to spend. So they don't get that. But what the DISCOMs will do is that they they will hide all of their other, inefficiencies under the name that, oh, we are giving it at subsidized power. So they are completely okay being, they're, let off by, even though they're completely inefficient, because, they have a perfect excuse. And then once all of this happens, they'll, ultimately they need money from somewhere. If not, they'll stop operations and they won't be able to provide any electricity. That's when the, union government steps in. And union government will run some schemes such as Uday or something, right? Which is essentially where they give a loan without any expectation of repayment, where they give a loan to the DISCOMs, so that the DISCOMs use that to pay the generators, right? Just so that there's some continuity. Now, where does that loan come from? It'll come from some banks. Now, the banks will have stressed assets, and there's a P&L problem on the bank's balance sheet, right? So it's, it's just one distortion after the other, leading to this complete mess that we find ourselves in.
And in fact, there are some more distortions as well. Sometimes what happens is, typically, in most of the places, what we have done is we have done the unbundling. The power sector, if you see, there are three different kind of setups here, right? One is those who generate power, the power generating companies. Then there are the ones who transmit power, and then you have the DISCOMs. But ideally, that should be the case. They should all be unbundled, and again, generating companies should compete with themselves. The distribution companies compete with other distribution companies. That should be the case. But generally, what happens in many states, the distribution companies are again state-owned enterprises, and at the same time, the power generation companies, they are also owned by the state.
Exactly.
So in that case, so what happens is the distribution companies are making losses, and since the power generation company is also owned by the state government, the losses are now getting transferred to them. So these guys are generating power at loss, and these guys are also distributing power at losses. So again, all these things boils down to the fact that the state governments are making huge losses.
Yeah, it's a messy thing, right? It's otherwise what you would say, you take from your right hand and give it to your left hand. Here it is, the right hand is not giving to the left hand is not giving it to the feet, and the feet is not giving it to something else, right? It's just an entirely messed up kind of affair. Now, we'll just speak about one last distortion, which I think needs to be covered, and that is the distortion for industries. Now, DISCOMs, because they have this welfare mandate, which is that they can't charge high rate for consumers. Then they, and of course for the agricultural sector, they're left with only one other sector that they can fleece, and that is the industrial sector, right? So DISCOMs go all out on charging extremely high rates to the industrial sector. Now, on an average, and please don't hold this against me because I don't have the exact figure, but I would imagine that, if the industries pay as much as 3 to 4x per unit of power as the household does, and household pays, of course, and then infinite against the agriculture, because agriculture pays zero, right? So that is the next level of distortion. Now, because DISCOMs can't make any money from the other two sectors, they charge an exorbitant amount from the industries, and therefore that by itself is it's extremely unfair to the industries that they're cross-subsidizing the other two sectors. But even if that, no one loses their sleep over it, you have to realize the potential consequences of such a move, right? Now, when you charge an extremely high amount to industries, then the cost of production goes up. When the cost of production goes up, then essentially all of these industries become uncompetitive. So not just in the foreign market, of course, but also in the domestic market. And once you become, uncompetitive in the domestic market, people will, if there is an import option, they'll just import it from elsewhere. Or if there is no import option, then the end consumer ends up paying more anyway for these things. So, you try to save consumers, but through a circular manner, and it all gets added up, by the way. Consumer ends up paying a lot more because of these things, right? So you're not really helping anyone in all of this. That's part A. But part B, and I think this is, related but also important, especially in this scenario in the post-pandemic world, is two things. One, a lot of industries have died down. So, even that cross-subsidization is not happening. I mean, they've died down, they've either shut shop, or at least they're temporarily suspending economic activity, etc. So, which means they're not consuming power, which means they're not really paying. And therefore, I think states and DISCOMs are losing out on that. But B, because there are such high tariffs, especially again in this pandemic scenario and probably in the future post-pandemic world, if there is any hope of attracting foreign companies into India to set up shop and and manufacture items, I think we're losing out. If you look at, average industrial tariff rate of of India and compare that with Thailand, Mexico, with
Vietnam,
Vietnam,
China.
Cambodia, all of our competitors who are vying for the same pie, as in, trying to attract companies moving out of China or otherwise, we're just going to lose out completely on that front. I mean, we're just uncompetitive on that front. So apart from a lot of other problems, this adds to it as well. I'm not saying this is the standout and sole problem, but it adds to it, right? So I think that again is something that we need to really look out for.
Yes. So, I mean, so the recent electricity amendment bill that was introduced by the central government tries to look at some of these things. So we had a electricity act in 2003. So some of these things, some of the issues that were problematic, this recent bill tries to improve on that. And one of the thing is reducing cross subsidy. It doesn't say that we should be eliminating cross subsidy, but it is saying that we should gradually reduce cross subsidy. And they are saying that how do we do it? They're saying that we should, at the central level, the central government should be mandating, or it should come up with some national tariff policy, and the state electricity regulatory commissions should be following the norms which have been set up by the national level tariff policy. I mean, again, there is a question whether tariffs should be there or not, but since they are deciding that the tariff should be there, and again, the level of tariffs might get reduced, and the cross subsidy amount can probably get reduced. And if that happens, then industries stand to benefit. But another very good, interesting suggestion here is that instead of providing subsidies to the discoms by the state government should be providing subsidies in the form of direct benefit transfers to the consumers. So this can also reduce the kind of burden that the discoms have to have, and the kind of losses they have to incur over a period of time.
Yeah, I think both these points are extremely important kind of moves in the reform of the power sector. So you need to, I think for sure, end this cross subsidy madness. And I'm okay with obviously industry paying a slightly higher per unit rate than households, but that should be under in reasonable terms, and not whatever 10x and 5x and so on.
We are controlling the prices, but there should be some some rationale behind that, right?
Yeah.
And we should not be penalizing someone excessively for doing something which is not wrong.
Exactly, right? So I think that is without doubt, something that needs to be done. So that can only be done if you start increasing the tariffs and increasing the rate for households, right? And we know that that's a no-brainer. Economic principles tell us that you need to charge a cost-based thing. So marginal cost-based pricing is what even discoms need to do. Remember, and I want to stress this, I'm sure all of my students are tired of hearing this, but for others, electricity is not a public good. Electricity is a pure private good, which means that you need to do a marginal cost-based pricing, right? And what does that mean? You need to charge at the rate that at the rate that at least the discoms, etc., don't make a loss. Okay, that's essentially what you're asking. And if you do that, essentially, yes, all of us will end up paying more, for sure. I think that's a given. But by how much? If you actually increase the prices, a couple of things will happen. One, of course, people will start saving more. So all unnecessary usage of electricity will go down, and that by itself is a good thing, right? And so on average, households might not end up spending a lot more than presently, right? So they'll pay more per unit, but the hope is that because prices have increased, they'll be a lot more careful, and so their overall bill will not increase by too much. It will increase, but not by too much. That's part A. Part B, and I think this is important, because the prices are low and discoms don't have money, and therefore you have extremely unreliable power. Households, as it is, their electricity bill is small, but all sorts of households pay a huge amount for other things which are complementary goods. So, for instance, I know pretty much every other household in above a particular income bracket will have a generator at home, right? Will have a UPS at home, and that is not expensive. That is not cheap. You need to pay quite a bit for that, and and in fact, it also destroys the purpose, because you use the UPS and then ultimately it draws upon that much more electricity later to get charged. But that's what people do. But the poor itself are not entirely free from this menace. So a lot of poor people as well will buy a diesel generator, end up spending money on diesel. And diesel, remember, diesel prices are now deregulated, which means that's not cheap either. They end up, kerosene and using kerosene and diesel for some of these things, and those are not cheap as well. In fact, a lot of times I would imagine that the poorer pay a lot higher amount to get some access to electricity than what the rich people pay. So that's the second thing that will happen. And third, if you increase prices, the amount of theft will come down. Right now, again, because of all of this cross subsidy that happens, the industries, instead of paying that ridiculously high price, a lot of them just resort to theft. And again, discoms don't have money to catch this theft. Right, so that's one of the thing that could happen. Or industry will basically, bribe people and get a household license, pay a lower amount. All of those, you essentially by charging and rationalizing prices, you will end up with a far more, I think, one, equitable distribution, and two, you will reduce the black market, you will reduce the distortions, etc.
Yeah, and Anupam, at the point that you mentioned, right, people might have to pay more. Yeah, that might happen. But at the same time, those who are the most vulnerable, right, for them, we do have some provisions. Like the bill also talks about providing direct benefit transfer to the consumers directly, right? It's the benefit will be transferred directly to the consumers. So again, there is some amount of cushioning also from the challenges that the poorer households might have to face as a consequence of this.
I mean, I don't think anyone who's been asking for reform of the tariff structure would say that, charge an extremely high rate such that no one can afford it, right? The idea is you charge at the market price to everyone, and for those who genuinely cannot afford it, and it's okay if you make inclusion errors there. It is absolutely fine if you make inclusion errors in the beginning, right? That is, ultimately some subsidy will go to those people who do not deserve it, and that's exactly what's happening now as well. So it won't at least be a big change. But what will happen is at least the poor people will now have that money. And when you do direct benefit transfer, again, there's 2 or 3 advantages to it, right? One, again, households will now have a lot more agency, right? Imagine a household which, let's say, doesn't have kids at home, slightly elderly couple who don't have kids at home, right? Or they don't need, electricity beyond 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. So they can shut off electricity and go sleep, become early risers, etc. And then use that money for other things. It's entirely up to them. Some others might use more of that money for electricity and less for something else. Ultimately, the idea is between water, electricity, part of healthcare, etc., all of that should be direct benefit transfer in such a way that they will have, people will have agency of how much and on what to spend this on. But anyway, that's the specific way of doing it. And I think, direct benefit transfer can give a lot more benefits.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, these things can work, but only thing is the state government should not be delaying the payments here. And again, they should have sufficient resources for this. So apart from DBT and reducing the cross subsidy to reflect the cost reflective tariffs, there are some other suggestions as well. Now, one thing that I want to point out here is electricity is in the concurrent list. So the union as well as the states can make laws on electricity, and some of the provisions that are there in the bill might be resisted by the states. For example, at present, we have all these commissions at the level of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. Then you have commissions at the level of the states. But the bill says that the appointment of these members will be by a committee which is selected by the center. And here the states do not have much say. They will have 2 chief secretaries in this body. But again, these 2 chief secretaries need not be from the state whose State Electricity Regulatory Commission is being appointed. Also, in the past, what used to happen was the industries used to cross-subsidize. So industries used to pay for the electricity that poor people get or households get. But now what will happen is, it is the states which have to give subsidy to directly to the consumers. And in such a scenario, the total subsidy burden is going to increase for the states. So states might find it problematic. It might be difficult for convincing the states. And if the states are not convinced, again, the law might not get implemented in letter and spirit.
I think this kind of the union state toggle will exist for any issue in the concurrent list. And I'm not too worried about this. I mean, the appointment of the regulatory commission here and there, etc. I think these are details that can be ironed out as we go on further, because the union in such matters comes out with a kind of a broad draft guidelines, etc., and then each state will have to make its own set of laws from these guidelines. So I think, they can figure it out amongst themselves. I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah. Anupam, is there anything else that you think is very important for this sector and which has been covered in this bill or which has not been covered in this bill?
Sarthak, there's actually 2 or 3 things of which, one is to do more with the logistical aspect of it, to do with dispute resolution and so on. So I think they're tightening the entire mechanism of dispute resolution. So again, this is the dispute resolution between the generators and the discoms and so on. And it usually, again, because there is a severe cash flow problem for some of these organizations, there's also that translates into contracts and commitments not being upheld, and that results in a lot of again, unpleasantness, let's put it that way. And so therefore, I think if you have a first stronger dispute resolution system, that helps. But 2, and more importantly, I think the other reforms will take care of some of these things on its own, right? If you rationalize the tariffs, etc., discoms will have more money, which means they'd be actually able to pay their bills. So that's a slightly smaller aspect of it. But the bigger thing, which I have ambivalent feelings to. I'm partly excited by it, and partly I'm disappointed. Disappointed because it didn't do enough. Okay, so they've introduced this other thing about allowing sublicenses. So essentially, a discom can sublicense certain areas or regions into other companies and who will take care of the distribution aspect of it. So for the ultimate kind of service delivery. Now, this essentially means that there is some kind of privatization that is being done for the discoms, right? So on that aspect, I'm excited because I think it's a no-brainer that, as I've been saying, some parts of electricity distribution should be privatized, right? It will result in a whole bunch of things on, it'll attract capital, it'll probably be far more efficient. It also means that there'll be lower amount of losses, etc. And of course, ultimately, it means better service delivery. And we can, this is not a completely alien kind of concept in India. You can, again, as I was been saying, there are 2 or 3 places which already do this, right? In Mumbai, for instance, you already have 2 private players. One is, Tata, and the other is Reliance. And they offer, of course, that along with the state-owned company, which is state-owned discom, which is best. So all 3 of them are in competition. And essentially, that means that, I'll just give you an, example of what this actually means. Bangalore, as I've been saying, which has only one discom, which is the Bangalore Electricity Company, that had, as I was saying, about 8 hours of power cut in the summer. In Mumbai, just a few days back, if if all of you remember, there was, front page headlines that there was a power cut in Mumbai, right? So that is the difference. If there is even a 1 hour power cut in Mumbai, it becomes national level news, whereas in Bangalore, there's 8 hours power cut. And the reason for that is that essentially you have uninterrupted power supply in Mumbai because of private companies operating there, right? And that just gives you an idea. Again, Gurgaon has private companies, etc. So you can take these models and probably implement it in a lot of other places. Now, I'm not saying that the state should completely exit the market. There is enough sense that state should be one of the competitors there, such that if the private companies are offering, are pricing too high, you can always fall back upon the state company. So, that competition is also what makes it interesting here. So that's the thing that I'm really excited about. But where I'm disappointed is that they're talking about sub-licensees to certain, areas, etc. But I would have preferred that they just go all out and say, we're going to allow full private companies to, work in entire states, right? But yeah, anyway, I think this could be a first step, and there could be other things. The other final aspect, I think, is on the national renewable energy policy, right? Which talks about making this transition to a clean energy and so on. So there's some aspects in it which talks about mandatory purchasing of renewable renewable energy, etc. Now, again, I think the big criticism on that particular aspect is that it's not very well defined. It's just initial ideas and so on. And I think it's best to leave it at that because these are not, fully fleshed out details. But even there, I would say that instead of making, mandatory purchase of green energy, etc., remove the distortions there as well. I mean, make solar and wind energy, remove all the distortions there, and I think the market will take care of a lot of those things.
And in fact, there are punishments for non-compliance as well. So, I mean, that can act as a hindrance also, so to some extent, because it's kind of that stick that you are showing, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I always prefer the carrot over the stick. So, if you allow, for instance, if you take out, I'll just give you one example. We currently put quite a high amount of, import tariff and duties on import of solar panels from China. And solar panels have, the price of them have drastically reduced. But yet we put import tariff on that, which distorts the entire, that kind of renewable energy market. So instead, leave that out. Let people, import cheap solar panels, but have a huge solar field which can provide to the grid. So there are a lot of other options such as that. Develop nuclear energy in the long run, and so on and so forth. So again, because it's half-baked ideas there, and we have half-baked ideas, best to leave it there.
Yeah. So, I mean, and one more thing here, I mean, this entire power sector, right? I mean, there are so many segments here. There is this fuel markets, there are retail markets, there are wholesale markets, and there is so much of interconnectedness between them. So again, some suggestions are also there that we need to probably restructure the fuel markets, because at the end of the day, the power generation companies will get their fuel from these markets, and the next thing, that the transmission distribution will happen after that. But generally what happens in case of India is it's very difficult to access these fuel markets, and the price of fuel, for example coal, will again, the same coal from the same place, the same grade, the price will be different depending on what kind of power plant you are, whether you are a private owned power plant, you are a public owned power plant, or when were you commissioned. So those kind of things also needs to be probably taken up in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we can hope for that in the next iteration. So,
yeah.
All right, folks. So I think we went through quite I wouldn't say comprehensive, but at least we got a nice overview of the entire problems that ail the power sector in India, and I think it's a welcome move that we are looking to reform some of these things. We should have done this in 1991. So in that sense, we are only about 30 years late, but again, better now than any time in the future. So hopefully this would mean that we have regular, uninterrupted power supply at competitive rates. That's what we look forward to. Thank you so much for joining us, and here's hoping that you'll join us again in the next episode.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I also just want to ask everybody if they could go to the website ivmpodcast.com/survey and fill out a quick survey for us. It would be much appreciated. What a week we had this week. We had so much crossover, so many great guests. I don't even know where to start. Okay, yeah, I do know where to start. Let's start with Uncle Please Sit. Uncle Please Sit, Joel and Tushar had Hamsini Hariharan. Hamsini hosts a show called States of Anarchy with their network. She is a China expert, and they discussed the India-China relationship. Really fascinating conversation. Cyrus had two conversations this week instead of our normal Thursday Cock and Bull. Great conversations, both of them. We'll be back with our regular Cock and Bull next week. But this week, you could definitely check out the conversation he had with Varun Grover. Really fascinating stuff. And Nikhil Taneja, who was the founder of Yuva and the creative director for the India Film Project Festival, which is going on this weekend. He was on the show as well. Cyrus was also on Advertising is Dead this weekend with Varun Dugirala. Cyrus and Varun discussed Cyrus's intent on randomness. Ranveer Brar, guested on Gauri Devi Dayal show. This round's on me. Another amazing conversation over there. Priyanka Khimani, one of the best IP lawyers in this country, was on Storytellers and Storysellers for a fascinating conversation. Definitely do check that out. And finally, I wanted to congratulate Zarina Poonawalla for her 100th episode. She had Ashish Vidyarthi as a guest on that. If you have not been listening to the Empowering series, please do. It's one of the great shows out there. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to the Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.